Here is Samsung's top S-series flagship of the year, the Galaxy S24 Ultra. Of course, this phone should provide one of the best smartphone experiences you can get right now on Android. But is it so much different from last year? I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's find out in our Galaxy S24 Ultra review. With the Galaxy S24 Ultra, Samsung has made some improvements on what was already the ultimate Android smartphone package. This year, you get a new 5x zoom camera on the back, a brighter and flatter screen, and a revamped design. The looks are quite similar to before, with the separated camera rings and squared-off corners, but this year the screen is flat, not curved. You get a frame of titanium rather than aluminum on the S24 Ultra, and the back has a smooth, satin-like finish too. As before, you have stylus support, and you can store the stylus within the phone itself. There doesn't seem to be anything new about the S Pen this generation. And both the S Pen and the phone itself have IP68 rated ingress protection against dust and water submersion. Just as last year's model, the S24 Ultra has a 6.8-inch QHD AMOLED screen and a 120Hz refresh rate. With its flat display, the S24 Ultra will now be a lot better suited to screen protector use, and you won't have sloped edges which would interfere with navigating interfaces or doodling with the S Pen. The display is quite sharp at 505 ppi, and it has even slimmer bezels this time around. And both the screen and the back are protected by a new glass called Corning Gorilla Armor. This glass is supposed to be up to 4 times tougher against scratches and impact, and provides 75% reduced glare for even better visibility. There's support for HDR10+ video content, and this year the phone can use HDR while you're browsing through your gallery or Google Photos. Thanks to LTPO tech, the 120Hz refresh rate is extra adaptive. It can dial down while idling to save energy, all the way to 24Hz or even 1Hz with certain content. And the Galaxy flagships have gotten a brightness boost this year. On the Ultra, we maxed out at over 750 nits with the manual brightness slider, and this could boost to nearly 1450 nits in auto mode when needed. We will mention that when the display is at very low or minimum brightness, you can notice a bit of graininess when you look closely. It didn't really bother us, but last year's model didn't have anything like that. The S24 Ultra has a pair of stereo speakers with very good loudness. The sound quality is great too, with noticeable low-end presence. You can wake up and unlock the phone with the under-display fingerprint reader, which is quite snappy. And the phone can come with 256 or 512 gigs or a whole terabyte of storage on board. The S24 Ultra brings Samsung's new software package, One UI 6.1 based on Android 14. It brings a few refinements and a bunch of new AI-based features which are specific to the new flagships. Plus, the S24 lineup gets a whole 7 years of software support from Samsung. If you'd like to find out more about One UI 6.1 and its specific features, you can check out our dedicated video. Unlike the other S24 models, the Galaxy S24 Ultra comes with the same chipset no matter where you buy it, Qualcomm's latest Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. Even better, it's a customized version of the chipset, with a slightly higher clocked Prime CPU core. That doesn't make a big difference, but it's worth noting. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 is able to provide better overall performance than last year's Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, especially when it comes to ray tracing for games. The chipset also brings advanced support for AI processing. As expected, in benchmarks, the S24 Ultra sits in the same ballpark as the other top flagships, and its scores are significantly better than last year's model. The Ultra is a bit more powerful than the Exynos 2400 versions of the Galaxy S24 or S24 Plus, but the difference isn't huge, and you probably wouldn't notice it in real-world use. The S24 Ultra has a more advanced passive cooling system than last year, with a larger vapor chamber. Even so, there was significant thermal throttling during our stress test, but at least it was gradual, without abrupt dips. The Galaxy S24 Ultra is powered by a 5000 mAh battery, the same as on the previous generation. The new model did perform a bit better though, with small improvements in screen-on tests, and an overall active use score of 13 hours and 49 minutes. Also like last year, there's support for 45-watt charging. It's decently fast. With a proper adapter and 5 amp cable, we were able to charge the S24 Ultra from 0 to 69% in half an hour, and a full charge took 65 minutes. There's also support for wireless charging and reverse wireless charging. Now let's move on to the S24 Ultra's cameras. Like last year, there's a 200 megapixel main cam, a 10 megapixel 3x zoom, and a 12 megapixel ultrawide cam. But now, instead of a telephoto with 10x zoom, there's a new 50 megapixel 5x zoom camera that's supposed to provide optical level quality at 10 times as well. Let's start off with the main cam though. It takes great looking photos, with nice colors, and excellent, relatively natural looking detail. There's a bit more sharpening than we saw in the other S24 models, but it seems to be a nicer balance. Some people would say the S24s were too soft for their own good. In low light, the main cam again captures great photos, with balanced exposures and wide dynamic range. Colors are also rendered well, with good saturation and generally dependable white balance. There's nice fine detail too, and it's natural, with conservative sharpening. There is some noise that can be seen in the shadows, but that's an acceptable trade-off. We'd say that the new model does a little better with fine detail than the S23 Ultra. The more relaxed noise reduction is leaving a bit more grain, but finer textures too. Now let's do some zooming, starting off at 3 times. This camera is a known performer, and we're seeing solid, familiar results from it. Overall, these photos have very good detail, with only very fine grain to be observed in areas of uniform color. Dynamic range is excellent, whether you're shooting outdoors or in, and even in portrait mode, backlit scenes are rendered nicely. Moving on to the new telephoto. Indeed, we're quite fond of the 5x zoom shots. They have nice detail and minimal noise. Dynamic range is great, and the color rendition is very likable too. And this camera can take some nice close-ups. You have to use Pro mode though, or the close distance may cause the phone to automatically switch to one of the other cameras. Just for comparison, here's how the S24 Ultra's 5x camera stacks up to the output of the S23 Ultra's 3x telephoto zoomed into 5x. At 10x zoom, which comes from the same camera, the S24 Ultra does retain good detail levels and noise performance. We'd say the S23 Ultra's 10x photos from its dedicated telephoto have slightly better definition, but they also have more prominent noise. So the S24 Ultra isn't necessarily worse altogether. We did notice a strange phenomenon. The S24 Ultra can capture better looking images if you fiddle with it to go to something like 9.9 times. Compared to 10x zoom, these have more natural processing and nicer rendition of fine detail, plus somehow less grain in the skies. It'll be interesting to see how this develops with future software updates. Now let's zoom at night, starting with the 3x telephoto. It produces solid results overall. The detail is very good in scenes with at least moderate lighting. The dynamic range is nicely wide, and the auto white balance is doing fine. Compared to the S23 Ultra, the new model is a meaningful upgrade in image quality at 3x zoom, thanks to less aggressive sharpening and more forgiving noise reduction. The 5x telephoto delivers fine detail as well as fine grain, in what is a restrained and likable rendition. Exposures are on point, and dynamic range is good too. Here's a comparison to the 5x digital zoom you'd get from the S23 Ultra. Of course, the new model does better. At 10x in the dark, the S24 Ultra is at least a little better than the S23 Ultra, but every now and then it's a lot better. The dimmer the scene, the wider the gap in quality. Now let's switch gears to the ultrawide camera. It's also unchanged from the previous generation, and the photos here are in many ways similar. There just might be a slightly nicer rendition of detail compared to the S23 Ultra. The Ultra remains the only Galaxy with an ultrawide camera that has autofocus, so you can use it to capture nearby subjects in sharp focus. The ultrawide does okay in the dark, perhaps a little better than expected by looking at the specs. We're looking at well-exposed photos with wide dynamic range and good colors. Pixel level examination reveals some noise or softness in the shadows, but we wouldn't call those deal breakers. Overall, it's once again an improvement in image quality over the S23 Ultra. The selfie camera hasn't changed either, and selfies are some of the best around. Detail is great in these photos, while noise is kept at bay. You get true-to-life skin tones, likable color rendition, and wide dynamic range. Not much to complain about here. The Galaxy S24 Ultra records video in up to 8K at 30 FPS with both its main camera and 5x telephoto, and the other cameras can record in 4K. Also this year, you can record in slow-mo from the main cam in 4K at 120 FPS. The S24 Ultra's video quality is generally great. In broad daylight, all the rear cameras deliver consistent colors, and they can be used together in more serious projects. And all three rear cameras have very good detail at their native zoom levels. Exposures are well judged, and dynamic range and contrast are excellent. Video stabilization is also excellent on the S24 Ultra. Walking shake is nearly perfectly removed, and panning is smooth. And in low light, you can expect good quality 4K footage from the main camera. The exposure is on point, dynamic range is quite wide, and colors don't suffer from desaturation. The detail isn't too shabby either. So there you have it, the Galaxy S24 Ultra. It's a fully premium package all the way around, as you'd expect from Samsung's top flagship. And there are decent upgrades this year. New build materials, a flat and brighter display, a nice new telephoto cam, and improved camera processing all around. Not to mention the faster chipset and longer software support. There are only a couple of nitpicks we'll mention. When it's at minimum brightness, there's a flaw visible in the display, and there's also a quirk with a 10x zoom. These are hardly deal breakers though, and the S24 Ultra deserves a full recommendation. Thanks for watching, guys. If you're looking for alternatives on our channel, you can check out our reviews of the Galaxy S23 Ultra and the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Let us know what you think, and I'll see you on the next one.